All right, Nuggets fans, welcome in to Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at BetOnLine. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I am here. I am excited to talk about last night's Denver Nuggets win as the Nuggets defeat the Miami Heat. Final score 133-113. What a tremendous game from the Denver Nuggets. Couple times where they let it slip back into a single-digit game, but overall, this was a very professional win. I called it last night on Locked On, and I think Nuggets fans should be very pleased for a variety of reasons. Most importantly, that Nikola Jokic was back and looked like he wasn't impacted at all. But second of all, that Jamal Murray continues to look dynamic, and the Nuggets, I think, are going to reap the rewards. Going to be great. And we have a lot to talk about here at the Game 41 mark, the halfway point of the NBA season. We will talk about that. We'll talk about everybody kind of filling in. We'll talk about Murray. We'll talk about Jokic. Plenty to discuss on this episode. Hope everybody is having a great day. If you enjoy this show, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Would really, really appreciate it. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, anything like that, make sure to leave a 5-star review. Those really do help, especially the new ones, because when people go to check out the podcast and they see reviews that are like, oh, wow, that's a good review, but it was a year ago. Like, is it still good? Is it still interesting enough? I think people, they definitely are. I guess I know from my perspective, that's how I roll. So I understand it, but would really appreciate it if you are a new listener and you really enjoy to leave some good feedback. Real quick, this podcast, as you know, is brought to you by our good friends over at BetOnline, the number one source for everything betting, number one source for everything football, and your most trusted advisor on everything on the sports side, from UFC to NHL to NBA to NFL to college hoops. You can't get enough of it with BetOnline. They've got all the great options. Make sure to go check it out and make sure to use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, let's get into this. Let's talk about what was a great Nuggets game. 133-113 doesn't sound that crazy, but when I tell you the Nuggets dominate the Heat, they dominated the Heat. Denver in their last 16 games against the Miami Heat, regular season and playoffs, are 14-2. 14-2 during the 2020s. That is crazy. Like, think about it. The Heat have gone to the playoffs, like they've gone to the finals twice in that stage, and the Nuggets just owned them. In particular, Jokic owns Bam Adebayo. I don't think he's had a bad game against Bam. That's kind of wild to think about, because Bam Adebayo's a guy that I think a lot of hipster Nuggets fans, like my co-host Matt Moore over at Locked On, they're thinking like, yeah, he's such an elite defender. He's so dynamic. He's awesome. He does so many great things, and that's true. But he doesn't have anything for Joker. And Joker came back, and he's sporting the right elbow sleeve and looked fantastic. Just a lot of great things. A lot of great things to see from Jokic. His line in this last game was awesome. 24 points on 9 of 12 from the field, 1 of 2 from 3, 5 of 5 from the line, 12 rebounds, 10 assists, 1 steal. Did have 2 turnovers. I know that at least one of them wasn't his fault. Mike just stumbled while he was trying to make a cut, and Jokic threw it to that spot. But Jokic only played 3 quarters. He had a triple-double through 3 quarters and continues to rack up the numbers and continues to do so efficiently. It was only a +6, but I don't necessarily point to that as a lack of his particular non-dominance. He was great during that time. And the Heat at various points, yeah, they made some crazy shots. They kind of shifted that plus-minus a little bit. They didn't make as crazy shots when their bench was out there, that's for sure. But it was great to watch Joker. It was great to watch him, and I definitely think that the Nuggets should they certainly have benefited from this. That Jokic was initially questionable on the injury report. It was something that I think people were definitely worried about, including me. And I said as much on this show that we just didn't have any information on how good he was going to feel, what it was going to look like. And lo and behold, it was fine. It was all very precautionary, I guess. And I wish somebody had told me that back in Denver, that's for sure. But doesn't matter. It's just good to see him back out there. And I'm glad that Denver was able to capitalize it with him. But he owns Bam. Like it's just so clear. The spin-off that he had in the post where Bam was trying to get very physical with him. It's like Bam was in a different area code after that spin. There was a Euro step that he had in transition that Bam just he didn't have any business getting to. Bam fouled him for an and one off of a great backdoor cut and Westbrook throwing a pass over the top. That was a tremendous play. And then the kicker, the final basket that he had that looked really great to me was when Murray was driving at the end of the third quarter and dragging two guys into the paint, including Bam. Jokic is wide open. Like, I don't know what Miami was doing on that play. They clearly busted that coverage, but really impressive play from both Murray and Jokic. And that's the one that you have to make, especially at the end of the quarter. And it just feels like Joker, the timing on these plays and when he makes these shots, it felt like a backbreaker, I think, to the Miami Heat. They had cut it down to 9. Denver gets it back up to 12, double digits. And then the bench actually takes off after that and makes it a 20-point game. It was a great day for the bench, but Joker was just so effective and efficient. And I'm glad that he only took 12 shots. And the reason why, it's not just because of the elbow stuff. It's because of his overall level of fatigue. The season has reminded me in a lot of ways of the 2021-22 season where Murray and Porter didn't play. This year they have played, but I don't think, obviously Murray for the vast majority of the beginning of it wasn't at his specific level. So Joker's had to take on just such a heavy role in trying to do too much. And then Gordon wasn't here for a vast majority of the beginning of the season as well. So he's had to do a ton. Getting games where he only has to take 12 shots and the Nuggets win comfortably and he doesn't have to come back in. If you do that on a consistent basis, yes, his numbers are going to be a little bit lower, but you're going to reap the benefits of a refreshed Jokic towards the end of the season and into the playoffs. So I really do think that will benefit them down the line. And then the reason why he was able to do that and why he was able to chillax a little bit was because Murray took 24 shots and he was great. I know that people will point to the efficiency and be like, oh, he had 30 points, but he did it on 24 shots and 2 of 7 from 3. He was fantastic in this game. There was a stretch that he missed a few shots in a row. Some of them rattled in and out. Some of them were tough misses. But I just loved the way that he played. I loved how aggressive he was, how he was getting downhill. He was doing all of these things and making sure that he assumed the responsibility for Denver. And whether it was the way that Miami was guarding him or if he was just feeling it or whatever it was, he took plenty of shots. He gave Denver something that they could center themselves around. And he was awesome. 30 points, 8 assists, 7 rebounds, 3 steals and a block. He had the only block on the Nuggets yesterday, which is crazy to me. And Denver only had 5 steals, and Murray had 3 of them. I know that a lot of people have criticized Murray's defense. Honestly, that's an area where I think he's been mostly okay for much of the season. But the numbers that he's racking up on the defensive end are pretty impressive now. I'm not sure how much it's he individually is impacting the defense, but he's trying. He's definitely not giving effort, if you know what I mean. And it's just been really impressive to watch him. The move that he made on Duncan Robinson in the post in the second quarter sticks out in my head like a sore thumb. Like that was crazy. Just shook him out of his boots and got to a spot, made a shot. And then he made some pull up, like he had a pull up three. I think he made a catch and shoot three. It was the zipper pass that Jokic had. Jokic was diming yesterday. There was no doubt about that. I probably shouldn't gloss over that. He made some incredible passes, and I'm glad it doesn't look like the elbow is really impacting him at all. But between that and between Murray getting to the spots that he needed to go, he also set the table for people. It wasn't like Murray just took 24 shots and had 2 assists. He had 8 assists, and he was passing to a lot of different people. He had a nice pass on a cut to Peyton Watson. He had a nice pass on a cut to DeAndre Jordan. He's getting guys involved. He also gets Michael Porter involved. I know some people have criticized him for that, but I think that he's just been pretty impressive for Denver over the course of these last 3 games. It's been the best 3-game stretch of his season by far, no question about it. And the fact that it's come on 3 days and 4 nights, or 3 games and 4 nights, is pretty impressive. Like, I didn't know that he had this in him physically. And it is clear as day to me that he just looks like a different player physically for the Nuggets. And I'm really glad to see that, because obviously everything comes down to him. You don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of other guys being able to up their games. So he has been tremendous in these past 3, and hopefully he continues to push higher. He's up over 20 points and 6 assists on the season. He's up over 45% from the field and 39%, or nearly at 39% from 3. That's incredible. and if I'm not wrong here, I think that he is also up over like 1.5 steals. Yeah, he's at 1.5 steals per game, and Jokic is at 1.8. So like those guys are getting involved in the passing lanes. Jokic always does that. Murray's averaging a career high there, which is pretty impressive. And he's just staying involved in that regard. So the shooting percentages are starting to come around for him. His true shooting is still at only 56. Like, it can be higher, but he's now in the positives in BPM. Like, he's trending in the right direction, folks. And I know that he wasn't worried, but he also knows that he hadn't been playing well. And for him to have that game that he had in Dallas, and then to follow it up in 2 different situations in Houston, and then traveling to Miami and losing 2 time zones, I think that that's a pretty impressive feat. And just really, like, it's a really positive indicator for where the Nuggets are at. When Jokic and Murray are like this, they can beat anyone. And I mean anyone. I mean the Celtics. I mean the Thunder. I mean anybody. Do they have that great of a chance? No, because those teams, I think, are still in a tier higher than Denver. But games are won by talent and by those guys rising above certain situations. We've seen Jokic and Murray elevate their games in the playoffs, make it so that opposing teams are like, oh crap, we don't have an answer for this. Can they do it against those teams? Yes, absolutely. Will they? I mean, I think Jokic will. I'm still worried about Murray against OKC if they have to face each other, which is why I think that Denver needs somebody to relieve the pressure a little bit. But this is still very encouraging. This is a different version of Murray that we are seeing versus what we've seen prior to. So I'm really excited for this, and I hope other Nuggets fans are too. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to chat about the rest of the rotation. I have some thoughts on the 9-man group that the Nuggets are starting to put out there on a consistent basis, and just what we're continuing to see from this Nuggets group. We will be right back here on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we are back. Pickaxe and Roll. Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Tony comments here. He says, I like the fact that Denver is riding on the low profile. I agree. You know, like, not a lot of people are talking about Denver right now, but quietly they have really bounced back and put themselves into a position where, they're not really concerned about making a certain seed at this point. Yes, they have 16 losses, and the Clippers and Lakers each have 17. Could Denver drop? Yes. I don't think they will, though. I think that they are now kind of in that rhythm that as long as, knock on wood, as long as everybody stays healthy, I think that they should be all right. They're in a pretty good place. So hopefully they continue to ride this wave a little bit and can get some blowouts and make sure that everybody's resting, because there is still a lot of pressure on the guys that they are playing. And the 9-man rotation that they're playing, it still does create some high minute loads for guys like Jokic and Murray consistently. Murray yesterday played like 37 minutes, despite the fact that the Nuggets won by 20. And Jokic, fortunately, only played like 31. But even still, he always plays 31 of the first 36 minutes, and that can be tiresome. So we'll see what they ultimately look like. But I am glad that Denver's coming to this 9-man rotation that they're doing. And there were some elements to it that I was really impressed with. First and foremost, what they've been doing with Gordon coming off the bench. He also was back yesterday. The only reason that he didn't play versus Houston was because it was a back-to-back. I think that other than that, he would be fine. He would be okay to play. Denver obviously shouldn't rush him. They should make sure that he's perfectly ready to do it. But I really liked what we saw from him off the bench last night. And what they've done in his place, they've started Russell Westbrook, Christian Brown, Michael Porter, Jokic and Murray. And that group gets off to the start that they get off for about 6-7 minutes. And then Strawther, Watson, and Gordon all come in at about the 4 to 5 minute mark. And they finish with those guys. Murray takes a little break while Westbrook finishes for much of the quarter, and then he comes back in. Jokic plays the entire first quarter. And then at the start of the second quarter, what I really liked was you had a lineup that had Murray, Strawther, Peyton Watson came off the floor, and Michael Porter got back on it. Aaron Gordon, DeAndre Jordan. So that's, again, Murray, Strawther, Porter, Gordon, DeAndre. And when you have two, like Gordon and DeAndre, it allows you to have a kind of a standard for defense and rebounding and making sure, all right, like we're not going to get a whole bunch of stops because you got Murray, Strawther, and Porter out there, but there are plenty of opportunities that they'll finish the possession. Like they're not going to give up a bunch of offensive rebounds with those guys out there. And yesterday, Denver gave up 6 offensive rebounds, and all of them were in the second half. So they started off really well, and there was a reason why they got off to a great start. But that's a baseline that they can go to. And having the offensive capabilities, all 4 of those guys, Murray, Strawther, Porter, Gordon, can shoot. All 4 of those guys can run offense. Not necessarily Porter there, but he has been improved in certain situations. And if he's got an advantageous matchup, he can go at it. But I like that quartet. And I think that that's a quartet. It's like the 3 of the core 4 guys and Strawther and Jordan. I think that they can get by with that. Now, is the defense going to be good enough in a playoff environment? I don't know. But to get through the regular season, that's pretty easy. And so I like the way that Malone has run that. He gets that group about 4 to 5 minutes, and then Jokic obviously comes back in at that point. Westbrook replaces Murray at some points, and to get him a little bit of a break, Christian Brown comes back in for Julian Strawther, and then Peyton Watson comes back in for not Porter, but Gordon. And then Denver actually didn't close the second half with Porter on the floor because they got back in, like they had Westbrook, Murray, Brown, Watson, Jokic. And that was really fascinating to me because you get the athleticism and the length and like the actual fast breaking capability of Westbrook, Brown, and Watson out there. And then you have Jokic and Murray. So there's a lot of different ways that they can run it. And what I like about that is they don't necessarily have to close every half with all of their top guys on the floor. And that might change when Gordon gets back into the starting lineup. Obviously, there's some things that they can do. But I like the idea of dedicating some of the core guys to that bench unit and making sure, hey, we are going to make sure that this is going to be the best possible unit that it can be. And you look at the plus minuses and you look at what Denver was able to provide. Murray, plus 19. Brown, plus 10. He mostly stuck with Joker, which I think is fascinating. Westbrook, plus 12. He mostly stuck with Joker. Michael Porter, plus 19. He staggered with the bench and did a pretty good job with it, even though he didn't shoot that well individually from two-point range. He was 4 of 7 from 3. And then Jokic was plus 6. But off the bench, you had Aaron Gordon at plus 8. You had Peyton Watson at plus 6. You had DeAndre Jordan at plus 15. And Julian Strawther at plus 9. That is tremendous stuff. That is really, really good. And getting different elements of Denver's rotation to be positive and not always just having, hey, Jokic was plus 15 to plus 20 and DeAndre Jordan was minus 10, and then you win by 5 to 10 points. You don't need that all the time. Like, Denver can dedicate some of their starters to building up those bench units and making them the best they can be. And I'm glad that they have. I'm glad that I think it makes everything easier for when Jokic is out there. And one of the reasons they can do that is because guys like Russell Westbrook have really stepped up. Christian Brown has stepped up. Peyton Watson is better than he was previously. I don't even think that Peyton Watson had a great game yesterday, but he just has a higher baseline than he did before. And you get that, and you get Murray playing at the level that he's playing. And you start to look at the rotation and think, all right, that's 9 guys that you can trust. 9 guys that you can trust when Denver's healthy. And you start to feel pretty good. This was the vision from Calvin Booth. And I know a lot of people are going to criticize him and have criticized him. The vision was that Denver had 9 real guys. What surprises everybody was that the 9th real guy is DeAndre Jordan and not Dario Saric. But DeAndre deserves just a ton of credit for being able to step up in this moment and making sure that he's been ready, staying ready. It wasn't Michael Malone's first choice, but he absolutely deserves that credit for being just stay ready, be that guy, fill a role. And then the Nuggets, they know how to play around DeAndre Jordan. He is less volatile and less unpredictable, or he's more predictable than somebody like Saric, who's going to kind of float around the floor, try to do a bunch of different things, and then Zeke Naji, who you just have no idea what's going to happen. And between that, it just feels like Denver has found something stable. And I'm glad to see it. And it can't have happened to a better guy. So DJ's been great. And you start to look at that. You start to squint and you're like, all right, there's a 9-man rotation, at least for now. Now, 9-man rotations go through ups and downs. It's not like there are going to be layers to that. There are going to be ups and downs to that. It's not going to be something that Denver's just going to be able to do through April and then May and then June and then win the title. I don't think that they are going to be able to do that. But could this get them through April? Sure. Absolutely. And I think that they're going to be pretty positive if they do that. Will it be perfect? No. Guys are going to have their ups and downs. But I do think in general that if the Nuggets are able to get through the regular season 9-man rotation style, and they get to play every other game, they get to play Joker 31 minutes as opposed to 37, they're going to be fine. They're going to be pretty good. Again, that might be overzealous too. They might have plenty of games where he still has to play 34, 35. And then there's an overtime game that he plays 42. And then Murray plays 46. And you just want to avoid as many of those as possible. But you can if you have other guys that are stepping up. Westbrook has stepped up. I didn't even mention his stat line yesterday. 11 points, 7 assists, 0 turnovers, 3 of 4 from 3. That's awesome. That's tremendous. It's awesome. You can't get much better than that. Christian Brown shot 60%, 6 of 10. Michael Porter, again, he shot 4 of 13, but he did shoot 4 of 7 from 3. I don't want to bemoan the fact that he went 0 of 6 from 2. There were a lot of step back jumpers. He didn't finish well around the rim, but one of those was a tip. I don't, like, again, not going to bemoan that too much. He still had 14 points and 9 rebounds, like, still finding ways to impact the game, and he made some unselfish passes. So it wasn't like he was just dominating the ball while out there. And then Aaron Gordon, who I mentioned at the beginning, it's like he will get better over the course of this season, and he will play more minutes, and he'll probably elevate into the starting lineup at some point. But last night he played 22 minutes, had 16 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, was a +8, 5 of 5 from the line, made most of his shots. That's a great night. It's a great night for him. Overall, Denver's offense just looked tremendous against Miami. And could their defensive use some work? Sure. I think that Denver's a little bit more capable of locking in defensively when they need to. I don't think they needed to in this last game, and that's one of the reasons why Miami still found ways to succeed offensively. But I think that Denver's in a good place with this group. Their identity is going to be more offensive than defensive, especially if they have Jokic and Murray. That's just how it's going to be. But they have enough defensive guys that if occasionally they're going to be able to shut somebody down, and they'll be able to win that way, even if their offense isn't going to be great. Now, they're not going to be OKC. They're not going to be Cleveland. They're not going to be Boston. They're not going to be, and like I keep saying Boston, but Boston's kind of like fallen off a little bit. They're 29-12. They're not in that, like, they're only 4 games ahead of the Nuggets. If that's like any, like that should be, I think, a pretty strong indication that they are not so far away from the Nuggets in a regular season tier that it's wild to even talk about them in the same conversation. Like they're still in the same relative time zone. The OKC Thunder are not, and that's fine. Like Denver still has work to do with them. But the way that Denver's kind of managed this through 41 games, they're in a pretty good spot. So when we come back, we're going to do the midseason thoughts thing. We're going to, I'm going to share some numbers, going to talk about where Denver's at as a team and where they can go from here. We'll be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we are back. Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you guys have questions in the comments on Denver at the midseason mark, let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. Make sure to comment anything that you're really wondering. I know most people are going to be focused on trade deadline stuff. Trade deadline's about 2.5 weeks away. The Nuggets are going to, they're going to try to get themselves to get better, but they don't have a lot of assets to get better unless they decide that they want to part with somebody that is in the top 9 rotation. So we'll see what they ultimately do. But for now, I think that we're going to have to wait and see on that front. If they don't want to trade Michael Porter, then the moves that you start to make are pretty small. So we'll see what they can ultimately do. Okay. On the season, the Nuggets, if I combine the standings on conferences, the Nuggets are currently 7th in the NBA in win percentage. Cleveland, OKC, Boston, Houston, Memphis, and New York are ahead of them. And Denver's 7th. Insanely, Milwaukee is 8th. That is insane to me. The way that they started and the way that things were going, they've just been able to bone up on a whole bunch of Eastern Conference fodder, like Washington, Toronto, Charlotte, Brooklyn, Philly, Chicago. Like all those teams are in the bottom 8 or bottom 9 of the NBA. And they've just been able to lift themselves out of the morass of those teams by playing, despite the fact that Milwaukee was bad, flat out bad at the beginning of the season. So, I mean, good on them for being able to do it. They are back where I think everybody expected them to be. Philly is not. And by the way, Joel Embiid will not be playing in Denver on Tuesday. That's pretty disappointing for a lot of people that wanted to see him in person. Yeah, but he may be back for the game in Philly, but that's also not guaranteed either. Look, clearly Embiid he's had a season from hell in terms of trying to get himself healthy. He's not really ducking Denver, or at least not intentionally, I don't think. He's only played 13 games this season. He's ducking everybody if that's what's happening, but it's not really what's happening. He's just not healthy. But you just look around and so the reason I bring that up is because there are other teams that clearly have it worse than Denver right now. And it's unfortunate. Like, you want to see these guys competing at a high level, and you want to see Denver beating them like during that time. What I will say is that Denver has not had a bunch of big wins. You look at the top of the Eastern Conference, Cleveland they're 0-2 against. Boston they've lost to. New York they've lost to. They haven't played Milwaukee or Indiana. They're going to play Orlando. They're the only team in the top of the East that they could get a win against. Not necessarily a great indicator of Denver's top-tier talent. And at the top of the West, you've got OKC. Denver's 1-1 against them. So, okay, you got to win. They are 0-1 against Houston. They are 1-1, but without Jokic, and Memphis didn't have Ja or like some other guys as well. So like that, I'm not sure how much that counts. Denver has played the Clippers well, and they've played the Lakers well. And those are the teams that are 5-6. So I don't remember how many wins. I think they've got 2 wins against the Clippers and 1 against the Lakers. So that's 6 total wins against the top 6 in each of the Western and Eastern Conference. That's not a lot. There's not a lot of great wins. And I'm not going to like bemoan that, but if there was a thing for people, like Denver's 25-16, most of the wins that they've had are against lower or mid-tier talent. They have not really shown out against top-tier teams. And like Dallas, I didn't mention in there. They are currently 7th. So you could point to that and say, yeah, look at what Denver did against Dallas. But Dallas was also never fully healthy for any of those games. And the guys that they were missing were fundamental to their identity. So I think that Denver, over the course of these next 41 games, what will make me a little bit more conscientious of like if Denver can win a championship is if they go into these places or if they host some of these teams and they finally win against those groups. Like, because I'm looking at OKC, Cleveland, and Boston in particular. Like, those teams have now mostly separated themselves. I think the expectation is that the champion is about 70% likely to come from those 3 teams between OKC, Cleveland, and Boston. And that's a high percentage. So if you want to break into that, if you want to show that you are a part of that group or that you need to be respected, you got to play well against those teams, in my opinion. My co-host over at Locked On, Matt Moore, does not necessarily think that's the case. He thinks that they've done well enough against those teams. They just have to log as many wins as possible against the Dregs. I don't agree. I think that there's more that they can do there. So we'll see what it ultimately looks like. But I think that that's one thing that I would indicate. I think that between Jokic playing at the level that he's playing at, I don't know if he's going to win MVP. Frankly, I don't really care. It would be cool if he did, but the way that Shea has played for a 34-6 team, or 34-7 now, is pretty impressive. So I'm not going to sit here and say that like Jokic has to win it, because like I think each of those guys have about a 50-50 case right now. So that's part of it. We'll see what the next 41 games bring. But can Denver crack that top tier? Can they be more consistent? What's going to elevate them to that? I think Julian Strawther, I'm going to do the two-man net ratings like I did after the first 25 games. When I did those initially, Julian was horrible across the board. He was like the Red Cross of death when looking at those net rating swings. I think that he'll look better this time around, but he's still probably the weak link in Denver's rotation from a stats perspective. If he can get back on track with that, I think that there are fewer holes in Denver's rotation than a lot of people want to say. But I look at guys like Jalen Green. I look at guys like Anthony Edwards. I look at guys like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and different players that Denver may face. Ja Morant. Are they going to be able to stop those guys? Is Christian Braun going to be able to lock in on those guys in particular? Can Denver give him the necessary help without compromising their defense? That's something that I'm going to be watching. Like, are those guys just unstoppable when they face the Nuggets because the Nuggets don't have enough? Are they going to, can Denver win with defense? Because they did in the championship year. It doesn't always feel that way, but there were stretches where they just locked in for about a couple months, 3 months on the defensive end, December, January, February, and they showed that they could do it. Can Denver lock in for that stretch this year? I don't know the answer. I do like the fact that Murray has gotten better defensively. Jokic is still at the standard level that he's normally at. If Aaron Gordon plays more, if he gets healthier, I think that he can provide more defense. Peyton Watson, this is where he has to really show. He can show that he's either a good defender or a great defender. There's a distinct difference between those two levels. Can he hold up against those matchups? Christian Braun, I don't really expect it. I don't think he's as good of a defender as what Peyton Watson can be. But can Christian Braun have a baseline and just be baseline good against all those guys and make them work hard? Maybe. We'll see. We'll see what it looks like, especially when it gets to game 60, game 70, and what Christian's actually feeling. Do the Nuggets have enough? Are they in a position where they need to make a trade in order to do this? I don't know. I don't know what's ultimately going to happen with this. The safe thing, of course, is to say that Denver doesn't have enough, because anytime you assume that you can do it, 29 teams don't win the championship. There's only one team that does, and the team to me that looks like they are on track to do it is OKC, because of the great mix of guys that they have, the options that they have. But their offense also kind of shuts down every now and then. So Denver can beat them. The question is, will they? And if Denver has enough on both ends of the floor to keep pace. And then when you get into a clutch battle against them, I believe in Jokic finding ways. I believe in Murray finding ways. I also believe in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander finding ways to do that. The question is, does OKC have a second guy? And can Murray stay at that level? Is he higher of a level than Jalen Williams on the other side when it comes down to playoff basketball? Jalen Williams will be, he might be a playoff or an all-star this year. And so the fact that he is already at that level, the expectation would be that he stays at that level above Murray. That may not be the case when the playoffs come around. So I'm very curious to see how Denver handles it, how they match up, and what they can do. What is Russ going to look like in the playoffs? Is it going to look distinctly different than his past playoff stints? Is it going to look distinctly different from his regular season stints? There's still a lot of questions. And I'm very curious to see how Denver looks in the second half of the season, if they make any trades to sort of elevate their rotation a little bit. Are they going to add anybody on the buyout market? Is this the roster that they go into the playoffs with? I don't know. I think that if I had to guess, I would say no. I would guess that Calvin Booth makes a move or two and that they are minor. But I do think that the Zach LaVine rumors have passed them by. I doubt that they kind of circle back around to that. Maybe that changes. But I think that this is mostly going to be the group that they have, which is why I want to talk about, why I talked about the top 9, why I talked about the group that they put out there this last night. They're pretty close. I think that group's pretty close. That win last night was one of those that I look at and say, all right, that's a professional win. That is a win by a contender. That is a win by a team that is in a clearly different tier than the Miami Heat. The question is whether Miami's like average or if they're good. And does that make Denver good or great? We just don't know yet. So we will continue to monitor it. I'll continue to talk about it. Is there going to be like a different level that Denver can reach? Have they already started to reach that level? Got plenty of things to talk about, plenty of things to discuss. But for now, I think that's going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at BetOnline. Denver's next game will be at Orlando tomorrow. I have a family obligation, so I'm not going to be able to cover that game as closely as I would hope, but I'll try to rewatch it that night, and we will see what happens with that. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Always appreciate the love and support on the podcast. As always, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button on the way out if you enjoyed. I will talk to you guys next week.